Zenn is one of the hardest Fortnite players to fight in the world. So in this video, I'm going to reveal why he always walks to the left, how he can track players as if he has wall hacks, how a Zone Wars player is so good at fighting defensively, and much more. So let's talk about walking to the left. Now this seems like a really bad idea because in Fortnite, the character model is to the left of the center of the screen. So by walking left into a peak, by the time your crosshair is actually over that peak, your body will be extremely exposed. So this basically means every left-hand peak puts you at a disadvantage. And since walking to left will always give you a left-hand peak, why does Zenn walk to the left so much? Well, take this scenario here where he's cracked the opponent's shield and hit them for 50 white whilst in the air, and then he begins to chase them. Well, despite being at the HP disadvantage, the other player actually has an advantage in terms of peak. You can see that from his perspective, he could do a peanut butter edit, he could do a window edit, whichever one he chooses actually puts Zenn at a bad position. But because the other player is so weak, all Zenn needs to do is hit one good shot. So as he approaches this wall, he predicts that the other player is trying to get counter damage and just swings really far to the left. And then as you notice, by the time the other player hits the peanut butter edit peak, he's not actually in a safe peak, he's way out in the open where Zenn gets the easy elimination. Now you notice that he actually took quite a sharp turn to the left and he moves quite quickly to that left direction. And this is ultimately what allowed him to get this peak. Now the first reason for this is the medallion that increases his movement speed, which as of recording this has actually been removed from the game. So you can kind of ignore that. But the second reason is because of his settings. Now, it's become a bit of a trend to get rid of double movement settings because players like Peterbot no longer use it. However, Zenn does. Now, if we take a comparison side by side here of both on and off double movement settings, if your double movement settings are off, when holding forward and a direction key, you walk at around a 45-degree angle. However, if you change the forward diagonal angle to 71, which is the same what Zenn has, when pressing forward and a directional key, you walk at a 71-degree angle, which means you walk way more to the left or right and less forward. So for this example, he can swing really quickly to the left, and then by the time the other player is edited, he's fully exposed. But doing this also means you don't have to use scroll wheel reset as much. Now let's take this scenario here. He's gotten into the box, he's taken the wall, he's standing on a cone, he's got a peanut butter edit, and in this scenario, what a lot of players would do is that they would shoot, reset the wall to block the shot from the other player, and then because the other player's already shot his shotgun, you can just re-edit the wall and then get a free shot. But if you'll notice in this clip, that is not what Zenn does. He jiggle peeks. He just repeatedly moves to the right, takes a shot, and then slightly moves his character to the left to try and hide back behind the peak again. Another advantage of this is that you're not jumping over the peanut butter peak, which means your crosshair can stay always on the other player, giving you better crosshair placements and giving you more consistency in your aim. This can also be used when you're using a top row edit, like in this clip here, as he hugs much closer to the left, making it much harder for the other player to hit him and giving him better angles to take shots from. Now, as someone who's mainly been a Zone Wars player, it's unsurprising that Zenn very much loves to play height over his opponents. But in a tournament match, if you just crank up to the sky and play like you would in creative, you'll just get third-partied and chopped out. So he plays height very differently here. You can see as soon as the other player starts to get towards the wall, he sprints out and just ramps over him, starting off the fight by taking height. But from here, he takes advantage of the footstep audio. Notice how he keeps jumping over the top of the other player's head, and then that leaves him completely lost, allowing him to take the floor and pick up an easy elimination. This is because if you're too reliant on looking at footstep audio and you're not actually keeping your crosshair on the other player, when they walk over your head or underneath you, it's very difficult to actually know exactly where you are. So by constantly jumping over the top of the box, the other player is just lost. But there are also many other ways that he likes to fight from above. Take this fight for example, where he gets hit for 95 damage and has to box up. But notice, as the other player tries to pressure and get inside his box, he runs through the cone and edits out and then jumps, resets the wall and places a cone on top of the box and then a ramp for him to land on. This allows him to be one layer up above and edit through the cone to give himself a good angle to get a shot on. This is specifically true because he ran to the right, which makes sure he gets a right-hand peek where he can see the entire box. Now, unfortunately, the other player did run underneath him, so he doesn't actually manage to get a shot here, but now the other player has ran into a box, which none of the edits are his, and Zenn is easily able to finish the fight. So just that slight elevation change allowed him to have a good right-hand peek and to make the other player completely lost. He also does a very few specific edits when he is above another player. Here, when the other player cones above his head, his reaction is to place a wall to the right, which allows him to escape, and then he ramps up and blocks over the top of the other player, covering also with 2 floors. Now, from this angle, he double edits down and doesn't place a cone in the other player's box. Instead, he places a ramp and then edits it top right to top left towards him, which completely blocks the vision from the other player, allowing him to get a free elimination. Had he placed a cone here, instead it would have been very easy for the other player just do 50-50. This looks very mechanical, but if you practice this, it's actually not that difficult to do at all. Now, if you're always feeling lost in fights, there's something that Zenn does here that if you start to implement, it'll feel like you have wall hacks instead of just being completely lost. And it is super simple. Now watch this clip where he's on top of the box and notice how many times the other player leaves leaves the screen. Did you notice it? 0. Coming into this, he'd already cracked him, but by continually keeping his crosshair focused on where that player is, it keeps the footstep audio in front of him, which allows him to always predict where the other player is going, and then he can just spam a bunch of floor and cones and prevent the other player from reboxing. And then let's go back to a similar scenario that I talked about earlier while he's sitting on this peanut butter peak. Look at his crosshair whilst he's doing all of this. There are very minimal times within this fight where his crosshair isn't just always aimed at the other player. So to avoid getting lost in fights, as much as possible, Zenn either keeps his crosshair directly on the other player, or always ensures that the footstep audio is directly in front of him. Now, one thing that pros do way better than anyone else is their inventory management. And this clip we just talked about is a perfect example of this. He's only holding 2 weapons, which is the Wrecker Revolver and the Sentinel Pump. But notice how every single time he shoots, A, his crosshair is aimed at the other player, so if the other player makes an edit, he's going to hit them. But B, he shoots, presses a build to replace it, and then instantly switches to the other weapon. Building up this really good muscle memory to shoot, build, swap essentially means you're minimizing the amount of time you have with your builds out and maximizing the amount of time that you have a gun out for. Thankfully, this is something that's really easy to practice, as you just need to go into any creative map and then just shoot. Press 1 build bind and then switch to another weapon. Shoot with that, press 1 build bind, switch to another weapon. It's very simple, but it's incredibly useful muscle memory to have, and it'll make your box fighting 10 times better. But just going back to watching the other player, this is another really good example of why this is so useful. Notice he's got the piece from up above, but the other player is actually just looking straight at him. It's very obvious that both players are going to trade back and forth, but as Zenn shoots, he places a ramp to try and block the other player, but he swings to the left, what a surprise, which makes him walk around the wall that the other player had placed, allowing him to get another shot. Now remember, in an earlier clip, he didn't walk to the left because he didn't need to, but because he saw the opponent was close to him and he was obviously going to jump up and place a wall there, watching him allowed him to walk to left and just walk around it and get another shot off. Now, where most players really struggle to finish fights quickly, this is something that Zenn does not struggle with. Firstly, tracking the other players is very important because then you're able to predict what movements they're going to make and counter those, which can finish the fight quickly. But one thing he's insanely good at is phasing into other players' boxes. Here he does a very nice prediction phase. Now notice he's approaching this wall on a right hand for him, but he just drops straight onto it and pickaxes it once. This makes the other player go for a peanut butter edit, but because Zenn is still walking to the right, he predicts this edit and already has his pickaxe out as he's walking to the right. This means that he can just pickaxe and just run straight into the box and double shot the other player. This is the exact opposite from the clip earlier where I showed you where he was swinging to the left. In that clip, he was swinging to intentionally show himself to the other player when they edited, but in this case, he continued to swing to the right to be behind the edit when the other player did the peanut butter, allowing him to phase in. He also loves the ramp phase in, which I swear has been completely forgotten about over the last few seasons. At a certain time, this did become way more difficult, and I actually believe it actually stopped working for a while, but it's still very doable. By placing a ramp over your head, as you break it with the pickaxe, you can still just jump straight into someone's box, which if they're weak, can finish the fight quickly. This has been around for so long, so I'm not trying to say this is revolutionary by any means, but it's something that Zenn does a lot, and I feel like less people are doing it than ever. Now, you'd think a Zone Wars player wouldn't necessarily be that good at fighting defensively, but this is not a weakness for Zenn at all, and he actually avoids a lot of the common mistakes I see in everyday players. Now, he starts this fight off by trying to pickaxe into the other player's box, but immediately gets counterpumped. Now, the first thing he does is build vertically up and create some space, distancing himself from the opponent, which allows him to get a single mini off. Then, knowing that he's not going to be able to get more heals off and reload, he creates more space to work from. Seeing that the other player is extremely aggressive, he takes a few opportunities to try and get some counter damage back, but notice how he's always on a really good right hand peak and isn't risking wasting that 25 shield that he took that time to pop. Now, notice when the other player gets into his box, he actually goes out vertically. He runs out the top rather than just creating another box. This is because he's used up all the bullets in his Wrecker Revolver and he needs to reload this. Now, this is a mistake that many players would make because they'd probably just try to heal. However, if you never get any counter damage, the other player has no reason to stop shooting you and stop pickaxing their wall and stop pressuring you, which means you're probably never going to heal. So by spending the time to reload first before healing, he then has the opportunity to counter damage. Then after reloading, he drops down back to where his old boxes were, builds 2 more, and then gets the chance to pop another mini off. By going up, he was able to reload, and then going back down whilst the other player was chasing him gives him time to heal. So by prioritizing reloading, then changing layers in order to heal, this allowed him to turn around the fight and then eventually win it. But there are some other really interesting things he does when defensively fighting. Like here, he intentionally doesn't place cones in his box. Now usually this is a pretty bad play because if another player gets inside of the box, they're going to place cones and potentially grab the middle wall, which is exactly what happens. But as you notice, as the other player gets in and grabs the wall, Zenn grabs the wall to his left, trapping the opponent in amongst all of his own builds. Then all he needs to do is edit out the box, walk around to the wall that the other player is in, and get a free elimination because he can't leave. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this because most people would probably mess this up, but I thought this was a really cool bait. And even if he did mess this up and the other player got into his box, Zenn is the master of not panicking. Notice how in this clip he tries to pre-fire the player editing the wall, and he does, but both players are extremely weak. One bad edit and he's dead. But from here, he waits until the stair is broken once and then takes out his pump shotgun, predicting that the other player is just going to spray through, and then he'd easily be able to get a pre-fire on. But the other player doesn't, so he sprints outside of the box, peanut butter edits, then does a great right to left ramp edit, blocking the other player's view, allowing him to get the elimination. Now, Zenn is relatively new to competitive, but I'm pretty interested in seeing his progression over the next few years. But if you want to see why it's impossible to fight Peterbot, you can click on this video right there.